This is internationally best-selling indie author Michael Brent Collings inviting you to join me at bestsellerlife.com/DCR to unlock my tips, tricks, and hacks for a successful writing career. So go to bestsellerlife.com/DCR and kickstart your writing adventure today.
This is Daniel.
And this is Krebs.
This is Alton.
And I am Matai.
And you're listening to Dungeon Crawlers Radio, the greatest geek podcast out there. Welcome once again to another amazing episode of Dungeon Crawlers. We're continuing our Minisode series. You've already heard from me. You've heard from Matai. Now the next up is Krebs. That's right. The brothers Krebs are wrapping up their portion of this Minisode series. And then we'll follow the episode up with Alton. And then I'll wrap it up in a nice little bow. Again, we're so grateful for all of you listeners, and we hope that you continue to share our episodes and continue to listen to us as we move through the end of this year and into the next. So with that said, I'm going to catch you next time and turn things over to Krebs.
Well, Daniel, you done gave us a great topic once again. You kicked this off by talking about Father Christmas, St. Nicholas, and our draw to it, the story of, the myth of, the legend of, the history of, as people. Why is it that we find this story so captivating? What about the story of Santa Claus captures our hearts and our spirits? Why is it that we keep finding ourselves going back and re-exploring, retelling? And you also asked us if we'd ever run a game that featured Santa or a Santa-like character. So, backing up for a moment here, one of the first things you brought up was, what was the first film? In fact, this was what you were going to go with. You said, what was the first film that you saw that told you the story of Santa Claus that really kind of captured you? And then you veered away from that, but I'm still going to go with it anyway, because I think it's germane to the topic. I remember growing up with the Rankin Bass animations, of course, Rudolph and you know, the Island of Misfit Toys and things of that nature. And yet, in 1985, there was a film starring Dudley Moore and John Lithgow and David Huddleston in a film called Santa Claus. Santa Claus. Just very, very direct, very open about what this film is about. I remember loving this film as a child. It's also the film that taught me about the color puce. But I digress. It turns out that this film didn't do very well in the United States, but actually is a huge hit in the UK. In fact, it is, I only just found out recently, it is somewhat of a staple around this time of year for English boys and girls and men and women of all ages. They absolutely love this film. It comes on TV much the same way that A Christmas Story comes on TV here in the States. That is how crucial it is to their Christmas traditions. And this film, I remember just being struck by the magic of it. Now, I haven't watched it in literal decades, and I wanted to show it to my family last year, and they weren't interested, so we didn't watch it. But this year, I'm going to watch it again. Especially since next year, 2025, will be its 40th anniversary. I feel like we ought to give it a little bit of airtime between now and then, for sure. That was the first movie that really sort of enchanted me concerning Santa Claus, and I absolutely adored it. I think the story of Santa Claus appeals at a broad level. Granted, Santa Claus is closer to anywhere between ancient pagan tradition and modern Christian tradition, as well as non-denominational or even atheistic observation. All of that is true. And yet, even if it's not part of a particular religious or cultural tradition, Santa Claus still has sway. It still has impact with other groups of other faiths, of other beliefs. There is still some spirit therein that is shared commonly among the human race, among all of humankind. And as you were asking questions about this, I immediately found myself realizing a few things. One is that if we go back into our own episode catalog for Dungeon Crawlers Radio, there was an episode we did called The Filoni Insights, where we talked about Dave Filoni's commentary on the prequels. And the key to everything in Star Wars, according to Dave Filoni and ultimately George Lucas, is hope. Hope is the key to all things. If your Star Wars story does not contain some sense of hope, it ceases to be a Star Wars story. If you take hope out of the mixture, it loses the magic. And I think that's because hope and faith are very intertwined. Now, we often say the word faith in relationship to religious belief, and of course it naturally has a place in that context, for sure. But faith is not just religious. Actually, the definition of faith is hope for that which is unseen. Thus, you cannot take hope out and still have faith. You cannot have faith in the absence of hope. Faith is an exercise of hope. Hope is that thing that we hold on to. Sometimes we use hope like a verb, like, oh, I hope this is so, right? And a hope is like a wish. A hope is like a wish. But a wish is something that you desire that you then give over to some external force with the hope that it will come to pass. But faith is more than that. Faith is action you take. It's not that you're holding on to hope, it's that you are exercising a belief. Again, it could be religious, it could be non-religious, it doesn't matter. Even when you have people who are running their track meets and they are hopeful that their team will win or that they themselves will cross the finish line first, and then they have faith in their training, they push themselves through the power of belief, they use that to propel themselves forward metaphorically and literally. Santa is very much the icon of hope, and our belief in him is an exercise in faith. Santa injects into a world on a regular cadence that feeling of hope that things are actually good, things get better, that humankind is not lost, that there is hope that good can still spring forth, because every day for 364 days a year, we tend to get inundated with the bad news. And let's be honest, just like we find in movies and television shows and stories, it tends to be the villain that is more interesting. It tends to be the villain that is more salacious. It tends to be the villain that is more attractive in the literal sense. We are attracted to bad news. We want to know more. We want to dive deeper. When someone gives you good news, there often isn't the same impetus to push for more information, to go deeper, to learn more. There's often not that reaction, or at least not in the same level or degree as bad news. People tend to gravitate toward the negative because it creates a sense of curiosity, of wonder, of how could that be? And we don't often, sometimes, but not often, give good the same amount of airtime. But 1/12 of the year, we start to turn our focus a little more inward in terms of how am I injecting good into the world? We tend to turn our focus to the needs of others. How can we be a blessing or a gift or a support to someone else in this time of year? Santa is the absolute embodiment of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. He is absolutely the icon of what it means for humanity to do good. Not just do well, but do good. And I think that's why we're constantly drawn back to him. I come from the perspective that humans are not inherently evil. We are inherently capable of evil. I believe this to be true. I think humans are inherently good and we learn to be selfish. We learn to do evil. We learn to take from others so that we can bolster ourselves up. I think we learn those things. I think inherently we are actually good, and we want to be kind, and we want to do good. And because of this, I think that Santa acts as a clear reminder to go back to our nature of doing good for one another and get away from our learned habits of being evil and selfish. So I think that that's what attracts us. I think it's actually our innate nature that wants us to be more like Santa and less like, well, non-Santas. The other thing that I think is important about Santa Claus in our culture is that I often view problems in the world as things to be confronted. And I think that that definitely has a place and it has value. It takes action, it takes decision, it takes movement to make change. Because of this, over time, I have developed more of a fighter mentality. I don't think I have a warrior mentality just yet, but I definitely have a fighter mentality. I didn't always. When I was very, very young, I had a pacifist mentality. You could refer to it as peaceful, or even I was more of a peacemaker as opposed to a peacekeeper. Peacemaker meaning like wherever I go, I would want to inject peace into the situation and diffuse any hostilities. And I still have some of those habits to this day where I want to diffuse things first before it gets out of hand. I think that's very natural. But the point is, I was also a pacifist. I would avoid confrontation and conflict at every cost. Not any cost, every cost. I would sacrifice my own self-image. I would sacrifice my own physical safety. I would bend the knee and lick the boot. I would do whatever it took to avoid conflict and confrontation. And in some cases, that was probably the wise thing to do, because there was no way on this planet that I was going to come out on top in that situation. But there were also some cases where I could have had more of a spine. I could have done more, and I could have stopped some force for evil from progressing forward in the fashion that it did. But I was so concerned with not having the confrontation and not having the conflict that I would pay every cost to prevent it. I was bullied ruthlessly as a kid at certain points in my life. Not my whole youth, mind you, but there were certain points in my youth where it was just nonstop and vicious. And so that definitely had an impact on me later. As I got into role-playing games, as I got into video games, as I got into more of those things, anytime I had the opportunity to play a truly strong and powerful character, like typically a warrior or a barbarian, something with just absolute brute force, I would gravitate toward those characters. Even to this day, I like to play games or characters in RPGs, for example, that have high DPS and has the ability to stand in front of the team, to take the brunt of whatever's coming in and to dish it out as hard as I can. That comes from a desire to protect. And that desire to protect comes from many experiences and definitely years of being a victim with no power. Then, as I got older, I developed more of a fighter mentality where I want to inject myself into conflict so that I can stop the conflict. I will try to diffuse it within reasonable means, but if that can't be diffused, if it must come to more aggressive action, I will take that aggressive action to the best of my ability with the intent to simply halt the confrontation or mitigate the damage. The reason I bring all this up is because when I look at Santa, I realize that he's trying to solve the same problem of wickedness, evil, violence in the world from an alternate direction. See, my approach is I'm trying to thwart or even destroy evil. Santa's approach is to inject more good. Just like when we talk about balance in the Force in Star Wars, and we talk about, the Jedi have so many Padawan and they have so many knights and so many masters and all that stuff. And then the Sith are known to just be in pairs. right? And then we talk about how, well, that's not really balance in the Force. Of course, the Jedi would be wiped out, and then we'd have to get balance another way. And we've had these discussions about balance in the Force. One way is you take the heavy side and you depopulate it. The other way to achieve balance is you take the lighter side, or rather the less weightier side, and you repopulate it. You increase its population. And I think that's what Santa does. It's not so much about destroying evil. We don't thwart evil through destroying it through Santa. Instead, Santa injects more good. He wants to inflate the amount of good in the world. He wants to bolster it and expand it. Now, of course, you can look at sort of tongue-in-cheek dark comedies like Violent Night, and it's like, well, that's definitely Santa destroying evil. Yeah, sure. That is definitely one take on the Santa myth, and we've seen multiple versions of that in the past. But in general, the spirit of Santa, the concept of Santa, the mission of Santa is to reward goodness. It is to inspire others to do good for others. The whole concept between the good list and the naughty list, or the nice list and the naughty list, right, is that we want to motivate people to think about their actions, to think about, are they being selfless or selfish? Are they bringing good into the world, or are they diminishing it through their actions? Santa is the great reminder for anyone, religious or otherwise, that they have a choice to do good. And I'm actually heartened. I'm uplifted. I am, to some degree, emboldened by the idea that we as a species of creature are naturally drawn to an icon of good. And it inspires us to bring more good into the world. I think that that is valuable. No matter what you see out in the news, no matter what celebrities take up space, no matter what the case may be, it doesn't matter when it comes around to the 12th month of the year, when we are reminded that we can choose to do good for each other. I think Santa is our icon for good in all respects of life. I think that he combats evil by inflating good as opposed to fighting to destroy. He works to build. And I think that we as a species are constantly drawn to that hope, that belief, that goodness in us can still rise, can still enlarge, can still do good works and service for others. And so, my fellow dungeon crawlers, I leave with you these good tidings, and that loving and gentle reminder from the bottom of my heart that when it comes to doing good, always remember to be epic and don't suck.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like this episode, please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find us.
Remember, the Force will be with you, always.
What happens when modern magic, high-tech weaponry, and an unstoppable dragon collide? Find out in the epic audiobook of A Dragon's Fate, brought to life by Daniel and Krebs. This Whitney Award finalist novel will pull you into a pulse-pounding world where a secret cabal battles for power, and a dragon could bring everything to an explosive end. Don't just hear the story. Feel the magic, the danger, and the action. Get ready for a ride you won't forget. Grab your copy of A Dragon's Fate, now available on Audible.